You hear your name, clear as day. The voice sounds familiar, comforting even. Someone you trust, someone you'd answer without thinking. But here's the problem. You're alone. The house is quiet. Your phone hasn't moved. And the voice didn't come from where it should have. Tonight, we're talking about something that doesn't knock, doesn't announce itself, and doesn't need a body to be heard. Because whatever just called your name wasn't human. Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. This is episode 3 of the Cryptid Files. I'm your host, Cupcake. Tonight's episode was requested by someone very near and dear to me. A request that came with a warning of its own. She said, "Please cover mimics, because once you know about them, you start noticing things." Mimics are entities reported across cultures, regions, and belief systems. Beings that imitate voices, speech patterns, and emotional tones. Even the people and animals we love most. They don't just copy sound. They copy something familiar. A parent calling from the woods. A partner speaking from an empty room. A child crying somewhere they shouldn't be. A dog whining outside while your dog is asleep beside you. And almost every account ends the same way. I answered, and I shouldn't have. Before we go any further, a brief content warning. This episode contains psychological horror, voice imitation, and stalking-style behavior. If you're listening alone, in the dark, or somewhere quiet, just know, this episode has a way of lingering. Because mimics don't chase. They don't scream. They don't force their way in. They wait. They listen. And when they speak, they sound exactly like someone you trust. So tonight, we're asking one question. If it sounds like someone you love, how do you know when not to answer? So you might ask yourself, what exactly are mimics? Mimics are entities described in countless encounters across the world, yet they almost never introduce themselves. They don't appear openly. They don't announce their presence. Instead, they speak. At their core, mimics are believed to be non-human entities capable of imitating voices, speech patterns, and emotional tones with disturbing accuracy. Not just the sound of a voice, but the feeling behind it. They don't simply sound like someone you know. They sound like someone you trust. And that distinction matters. Because a mimic isn't trying to scare you at first. It's trying to get your attention. Most reported encounters follow a particular pattern. The voice belongs to someone emotionally close to the witness. A family member calling from another room, a spouse greeting you when you walk through the door, a child crying for help, a friend using an inside joke, something only they should know. and disturbingly often a pet. Dogs are the most commonly reported. People hear their dog whining outside, scratching at the door, or barking in distress, only to look down and realize the dog is already inside, fast asleep. That moment, when your brain tries to reconcile what you're hearing with what you're seeing, is when many people say something breaks. Because the voice doesn't stop. It waits. Mimics don't just repeat words. They replicate speech cadence, tone, and emotional urgency. A panicked voice sounds panicked. A loving voice sounds warm. A familiar voice uses familiar phrasing. Some witnesses report mimics copying accents, pet names, stutters or speech quirks, and emotional states like fear or exhaustion. Which raises a terrifying question. How does it know how someone sounds when they're afraid? One of the most unsettling aspects of mimic encounters is location. The voice almost always comes from somewhere it shouldn't. From the woods behind your house, from a basement when no one is home, from a hallway you can clearly see is empty, from outside your tent in the middle of the night. Sometimes the voices come from behind you. And sometimes it moves. People describe hearing the voice call from far away, then closer. From downstairs, then the hallway. From the yard, then right outside your door. Not walking. No footsteps. Just closer. Mimics rarely improvise. They repeat a name over and over. A short sentence, a request for help. Hey, come here. I need you. Help me. The repetition is subtle at first, almost comforting. Familiar phrases spoken the same way each time. But repetition has a purpose. It wears you down. It pulls focus. It creates urgency. And for many witnesses, the moment they respond, verbally or physically, the experience escalates. This is one of the most chilling consistencies in mimic reports. When the voice is acknowledged, it reacts. People say the voices grow clearer, the tone becomes more emotional, the calls happen more frequently, or the presence feels closer. Some describe hearing breathing afterward. Others report shadows, movements, or pressure in the room. But when the voice is ignored, in many cases, it stops. Not immediately, not dramatically. It simply goes quiet, as if whatever was speaking realized it wasn't welcome. Or worse, was waiting for another opportunity. Mimics don't rely on force. They rely on recognition. They weaponize instinct, the urge to respond when someone you love calls your name. That's what makes them different from other cryptids or paranormal encounters. You're not being chased. You're being invited. And the scariest part, almost everyone who hears a mimic is certain of one thing. If they hadn't known better, they would have answered. What makes mimics truly unsettling isn't just how modern the encounters feel. It's how old they are. Long before microphones, phones, or recorded sound, people across the world were already warning each other about voices that lie. Different cultures, different languages, different beliefs. Same rule. Do not answer what calls your name if you cannot see it. In many Native American oral traditions, there are warnings about entities that imitate humans, not by appearance, but by voice. These beings are often described as inhuman intelligences that study people from a distance. They listen, they learn patterns, they observe relationships. And when they speak, they choose voices that carry authority, familiarity, or emotional weight. Elders, family members, or even loved ones. The voice is rarely loud. It's often calm, sometimes even gentle. The danger isn't aggression. The danger is trust. In these stories, responding, especially calling back, is considered a form of invitation. Acknowledgement creates a connection. Once that connection is made, the entity is said to gain influence, proximity, or awareness of the person. This is why, in some traditions, people are taught never answer voices in unfamiliar places, never follow a call you can't see, and never respond alone. Silence is protection. In Celtic folklore, especially in Ireland and Scotland, forests and wild places are not empty. They are watched. The Fae, often misunderstood as harmless tricksters, are frequently described as voice lurers. They imitate cries for help, the voices of children, or loved ones to draw travelers off paths and deeper into the woods. These voices are described as beautiful, familiar, comforting, and often wrong. Someone hears their name called from behind the trees. A spouse's voice calling at dusk. A child laughing where no child should be. Those who follow rarely return unchanged. In Fae lore, acknowledging the voice is a mistake. Speaking back grants attention. Stepping towards it grants permission. The woods don't have to chase you. You walk in willingly. Across northern regions, especially colder climates, there are stories of entities that mimic human distress. A cry for help in the snow, a familiar voice calling from the dark, someone asking to be let inside. These beings are not described as fast or violent. They are patient. They rely on isolation, exhaustion, and compassion. Voice mimicry in these stories isn't used to frighten. It's used to survive. The voice draws prey closer, often in harsh environments where hesitation can be fatal. The warning is always the same. If you hear something human where no human should be, it isn't. In Appalachian folklore, the rule is simple and passed down quietly. Don't answer voices in the woods. Not your name, not crying, not singing, especially at night. Stories describe voices calling from hollers, tree lines, and ridges, often using the voices of neighbors, family members, or friends. Sometimes the voices sound slightly off. Sometimes it's perfect. People who respond report getting lost on familiar land, losing time, feeling watched, or a sense of something following them home. The mountains are described not as haunted, but aware. And whatever lives there doesn't need to show itself. In various Asian folklore traditions, there are spirits known for imitation, particularly of family members. Some are said to mimic the voices of deceased loved ones, a parent calling a child, or a spouse speaking from another room. These entities often appear at dusk, night, or in transitional spaces like doorways or hallways. In many stories, the voice will call repeatedly, but will never cross a threshold unless invited. Which is why doors, names, and verbal responses hold power in these situations. If you don't answer, the voices fade. If you do, something enters. Across every culture, every region, every belief system, the warnings align. The voice alone is not dangerous. Your response is. Whether the entity is described as a spirit, fae, predator, or something unnamed, the rule never changes. Don't follow unseen voices. Don't answer what you can't see. Don't trust something familiar in the dark. Because whatever is calling already knows your name. The question is whether you'll give it permission to use it. What makes mimics especially terrifying isn't folklore or theory. It's how normal the encounters feel. These aren't ancient legends whispered around fires. They're happening in homes, on phones, in backyards, or on familiar trails. And most people don't realize what they experience until after it's over. Listener submission. I'm convinced there's a mimic in my home. My family hears it most often when I'm not there. They hear my voice calling out, moving through the house, saying things I usually say, casual, normal things. At first, they brushed it off. They assumed I had come home early or stepped into another room. But then, my son told me something that made my blood turn cold. He said I came into his room one night and gently woke him up. He recognized my voice. He saw my shape standing in the doorway. He answered me. The problem is, I never left my bed. I was asleep the whole time. Since then, my family double checks before responding when they hear me. If they hear my voice and I'm not physically in front of them, they don't answer at all. Whatever it is, sounds exactly like me. There are also documented reports, phone calls that never happened. These are often dismissed as glitches. Missed calls from loved ones, voicemails with breathing, calls answered with silence. But when asked, the person on the other end insists, "I never called you." Some reports describe hearing a loved one speak briefly, asking where they are, sounding confused, then hanging up. Phone records show nothing. In a few cases, the voice uses phrases the loved one would say, but insists they didn't. These encounters leave people shaken, not because of what they heard, but because of what it implies. If something can imitate a voice through a phone, where else can it reach you? Different locations, different people, different circumstances. The same pattern. The voice is familiar. The situation feels normal. The timing is unexpected. The voice wants acknowledgement. And the moment the person realizes something is wrong, the voice disappears. Almost like it knows it's been caught. Many witnesses report lingering effects, feeling watched, increased anxiety and silence, distrust of familiar voices, difficulty sleeping, or animals acting strangely afterward. Some say it only happened once. Others believe it returned, months or even years later, using a different voice. Which leads to the most unsettling idea of all. What if mimics don't hunt randomly? What if they remember who almost answered? Because once you've heard a voice that shouldn't exist, you never hear silence the same way again. By now, one thing should be clear. Mimics don't fit neatly into a single category. They aren't consistently visible. They don't behave the same way every time. And they don't leave physical evidence behind. Which is why theories about what a mimic is vary widely, depending on belief, culture, and experience. None of these explanations are definitive, but each one answers a different piece of the puzzle. One of the most common modern theories is that mimics are interdimensional predators, beings that don't fully exist in our reality. In this theory, sound is a bridge. The mimic doesn't cross into our world physically. It reaches across using voice, something that doesn't require a body. The voice isn't bait in the traditional sense. It's a probe. Calling a name tests awareness. A response confirms presence. Recognition strengthens the connection. That could explain why acknowledgement matters so much. You're not being hunted by something walking towards you. You're being noticed by something leaning closer. Another theory suggests mimics may be thought forms, entities created or sustained by belief, fear, or repeated attention. Not imagined, but fed. In this view, mimics don't exist independently. They emerge in moments of vulnerability, stress, exhaustion, isolation, or grief. The voice sounds familiar because your mind supplies the template, but the experience feels external, separate, real. Some believe these entities grow stronger the more they are acknowledged, spoken about, feared, or interacted with, which would explain why ignoring them often works. No attention, no fuel. This theory frames mimics as parasitic entities, not predators that kill, but entities that attach. They don't want your body. They want your focus. Paranormal parasites are thought to feed on fear, emotional response, attention, and recognition. Voice imitation is efficient. It bypasses logic and triggers instinct. Once acknowledged, the entity may linger, causing anxiety, recurring sensations, or a sense of being watched. It doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be felt. Not all explanations are supernatural. Some researchers point to trauma-responsive hallucinations, auditory experiences triggered by stress, grief, or heightened alertness. The brain, trying to protect itself, creates familiar voices to ground the person. But here's the problem. Many mimic encounters happen in calm moments to multiple people at once, with identical phrasing across cultures, which doesn't neatly align with known psychological patterns. This theory explains some experiences, but not all. In certain belief systems, there are entities meant to protect natural spaces, forests, mountains, and ancient land. When humans trespass, disrupt, or disrespect these places, the guardians don't attack. They deter. A voice calling you off the trail, a familiar sound drawing you away, a sense of being watched until you leave. In this theory, mimics aren't evil. They're warnings. The danger comes when humans misunderstand the message and foul anyway. The most unsettling theory is also the simplest. Mimics may not need fear. They may need recognition. Hearing your name spoken by something that shouldn't know it is destabilizing. It forces awareness. It creates a moment of connection. Fear might be the byproduct. Recognition might be the goal. Once you acknowledge the voice, out loud or internally, you've confirmed something important. You exist. You're listening, and you can be reached. Mimics don't need a single explanation. They may create a category, not a species. Different things behaving the same way because the method works. A voice is intimate. A voice bypasses defenses. A voice doesn't need permission to enter your mind. And whatever mimics are, they've learned that sounding human is enough. Because if they show their true form, you'd never answer. If mimics have one weakness, it's this: they rely on you to participate. They don't force interaction, they invite it. Which means survival, in most accounts, comes down to restraint. These aren't guarantees. They aren't rituals. They're rules passed along by people who heard something they shouldn't have and lived to talk about it. This is the oldest rule. If you hear a voice, but you don't see the person it belongs to, don't answer. Not verbally, not with a sound, not even with acknowledgement under your breath. Many witnesses say the moment they speak, the situation changed. The voice sharpened, the presence felt closer, or the atmosphere shifted. Silence, in contrast, often ends the encounter. Whatever is calling already knows your name. Mimics rarely ask you to follow outright. They call from somewhere just out of reach. Another room, beyond the tree line, down the hall, maybe outside the door. Every step toward the voice is described as feeling wrong, but familiar enough to override instinct. If you hear a voice leading you away from safety, stop. Distance is protection. Across cultures, thresholds are boundaries. Doors, windows, tents, and tree lines. Many mimic encounters stop at those edges. The voice may call from outside, but won't enter unless invited. That invitation doesn't need to be spoken. Opening a door, stepping outside, or calling back. These small actions are enough. If something wants you to cross a boundary, ask yourself why it can't cross first. Animals notice what we dismiss. Dogs, especially, are mentioned in countless reports. They freeze, they growl at empty space, they refuse to go outside, or they remain calm when a distressing sound suggests they shouldn't be. If your dog isn't reacting to a sound that's upsetting you, that matters. Trust the animal. They don't question instinct. This is the hardest rule. Humans are wired to respond to familiarity. A loved one's voice feels safe, even when logic says it shouldn't. Mimics exploit that. Silence may feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't deceive. Familiarity can. If something sounds like someone you love, but the situation doesn't make sense, choose quiet. Let the moment pass. Silence doesn't mean danger. Sometimes it means you weren't chosen. If you hear something that shouldn't exist, don't try to understand it in the moment. Understanding can come later. Survival comes first. Because mimics don't attack the unaware. They wait for recognition. And the safest response is none at all. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay quiet. If tonight's episode felt familiar, If something you heard before suddenly makes sense now, you're not alone. Mimic encounters are rarely shared out loud. Most people dismiss them, second-guess themselves, or decide it's easier not to revisit the moment at all. But if you've ever heard a voice that shouldn't have been there, a loved one calling from the wrong place, a sound that doesn't match reality, a moment where instinct told you not to answer, I want to hear your story. You can send in encounters involving voices calling your name, familiar sounds in empty places, phone calls that never happened, animals reacting to something unseen, or moments you still can't explain. You can submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous. No names, no locations unless you choose, just the experience. And if enough of you come forward, we'll do a future listener-only Mimics episode, an entire Cryptid File installment built solely from your real encounters. Because sometimes the most unsettling stories aren't the ones passed down through history. They're the ones happening right now. Until then, remember this. If you hear something you can't see, you don't owe it a response. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.